They say money can't buy happiness, but in Lagos, $2 billion can buy a whole new reality. I was standing in a glass-walled office in Victoria Island, surrounded by men in three-piece suits who smelled like expensive cigars and buried secrets. On the mahogany desk sat a document that would make me, Anthony, the most powerful 30-year-old in Nigeria. My father, Chief Emeka, was dead, and he had left me the keys to his kingdom. But as I leaned in to sign, the family lawyer, a man with a face like dry leather, gripped my wrist. "Before you touch that pen," he whispered, "you need to know the price. Your father didn't leave you a fortune, he left you a debt." The will contained a single brutal clause. I couldn't touch a single kobo of that 2 billion until I traveled to a forgotten village on the outskirts of the Delta and looked every single survivor of the 2014 Black Sunday spill in the eye. No bodyguards, no cameras, no filters, just me and the people my father broke to build his throne. I thought it was a senile man's final game. I didn't know that by the time I reached the end of that list, I would be wishing I was born a beggar. The transition from the luxury of Lekki to the rot of the village was like falling through a trapdoor into a nightmare. My SUV, a vehicle that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime, felt like a spaceship landing on a dead planet. The air didn't just smell bad, it tasted like copper and burnt rubber. When I stepped out, the silence was what hit me first. In a normal village, you hear children laughing or the rhythmic thud of a pestle hitting a mortar. Here, there was only the wet, heavy sound of the Black River licking a shore that had long ago forgotten the color of sand. My father's longtime fixer, Philip, stood by the car door, his face a mask of iron. He handed me a tablet with 400 names. "Each name is a life, Anthony," he said, "and each life is a story your father paid to bury." I walked toward the first hut. Obi, an old man whose skin looked like scorched earth, sat there waiting. He didn't move, he didn't blink, he just stared at my designer shoes, then slowly raised his eyes to mine. In that look, I didn't see anger. I saw a bottomless, soul-crushing exhaustion. I stood there for 10 minutes, the heat of the sun mixing with the heat of my own shame, until Philip finally tapped the screen. "One down," he said, 399 to go. By the third day, the adventure had become a psychological war. I wasn't just looking at people, I was looking at the living evidence of a calculated massacre. I found the secret ledgers in a rusted field in the company's abandoned office. These weren't just business records, they were a roadmap of greed. In July 2014, the sensors had picked up a massive structural failure in the main pipeline. The engineers had begged my father to shut down the flow, but my father was 3 days away from closing a massive deal with an international conglomerate. If he turned off the oil, he'd lose his leverage. So he did the math. He decided that the lives of 400 villagers were worth less than a 15% bump in his stock price. He signed a memo. I saw it, his signature bold and arrogant, ordering the technicians to increase pressure to flush the line. It didn't flush. It exploded. He didn't send doctors, he sent PR specialists and bags of rice to buy the silence of grieving mothers. I sat on the dirt floor of that office and vomited. I realized my entire life, my London education, my gold watches, my arrogance, was funded by the slow poisoning of an entire community. I wasn't an heir, I was a parasite. I called my sister Natasha back in Lagos, hoping for a shred of sanity. I told her we had to give it back, all of it. The 2 billion wasn't ours, it was the blood price for this land. Her reaction was a slap through the phone. "Don't be a dramatic child, Anthony," she snapped. "Papa did what any lion would do. He secured the pride. If you go public with those ledgers, you don't just lose the money, you lose our name. You'll be the man who turned his father into a monster." She told me that if I didn't sign the acceptance papers by Friday, she would use the family's legal team to have me declared mentally unfit. She'd claimed the village heir had broken my mind. I looked at the phone, then out at the Black River. My own flesh and blood was ready to erase me to protect a bank balance. It wasn't just my father who was the monster. The monster had been sitting at our dinner table for 30 years, wearing silk and drinking vintage wine. The betrayal felt like a physical weight in my chest. I had to choose, become a silent billionaire or a crazy outcast. Every luxury I ever enjoyed suddenly felt like a chain around my neck. That night, Philip led me to a part of the village that the oil hadn't touched, but the grief had. He took me to a small hidden grave at the edge of the forest. "You remember why Cecilia left, don't you?" he asked. Cecilia was the nanny who had raised me, the only person who ever hugged me when my father was too busy with his oil rigs. I told him the official story. She retired and went back to her people. Philip shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. She didn't retire. Her only son, John, was one of the boys who played in the river the day the pipe burst. He died in her arms, coughing up black bile while you were at your birthday party in Lagos. My heart stopped. The woman who had given me all the love my father couldn't was a victim of the very man she worked for. When she tried to beg for help, my father didn't just fire her, he blackmailed her. He told her if she ever spoke about the oil, he would ensure her remaining family disappeared. She lived out her final days in this mud, watching the water that killed her son flow past her door while she sent me birthday cards she had to pay neighbors to write. The realization was a soul-shattering gut punch. My father hadn't just stolen lives, he had stolen the soul of the only person who truly cared for me. As the final day approached, the weight of the faces I had seen began to fracture my mind. I had seen mothers who couldn't nurse their babies because their bodies were full of toxins. I had seen men who were once proud fishermen, now reduced to begging for scraps of contaminated fish. And then Philip revealed the final layer of the betrayal. He hadn't just been my father's fixer, he had been a hostage. My father had kept Philip's family in a company house in Lagos, essentially holding them as collateral to ensure Philip kept the village quiet for a decade. "Your father knew he was dying, Anthony," Philip said, his voice cracking for the first time. "He didn't want you to visit this village to be a hero. He wanted you to see what it takes to be like him. This wasn't a lesson in empathy. It was a test to see if you were ruthless enough to keep the secret." My father wasn't repenting. He was recruiting me from the grave. He wanted to know if I would become the new warden of Okoko or if I would crumble. The $2 billion was the prize for my soul. I spent the night walking the perimeter of the village. Every person I had looked in the eye seemed to be standing in the shadows, watching me. I realized that my father's success was a house of cards built on a foundation of corpses. I thought about the sacrificial love of Cecilia, who stayed silent just to protect her surviving family. I thought about the ungrateful life I had led, complaining about the temperature of my wine while people here were drinking poison. The moral dilemma was no longer about the money, it was about the very definition of a failure. My father had always told me that a man who loses his fortune is a failure. But as the sun began to rise over the blackened delta, I realized that the only true failure was the man who could look at this destruction and still want to be a billionaire. I reached into my bag and pulled out the legal documents. They were crisp, clean, and smelled of the city. They didn't belong here. Friday morning arrived like a funeral. The legal team from Lagos had flown in, their helicopter blades kicking up the poisoned dust of Okoko. They laid out the final papers on a folding table in the square. The Succession Act. It wasn't just a will, it was a legal gag order. By signing, I would inherit the fortune, but I would also legally agree that the 2014 spill was an act of God and that the company had no liability. Natasha was there, looking at me with a mixture of pity and greed. "Sign it, Anthony," she whispered. "Don't let these people take everything we've worked for." The head lawyer handed me the gold fountain pen. "Think of the legacy, sir. Think of the future." I looked at the crowd of villagers who had gathered. They weren't shouting, they weren't begging, they were just watching. They had seen this 1,000 times, wealth winning over justice. I looked at Philip, who was standing in the shadows, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. I picked up the pen, felt its weight, and then I did the one thing they didn't prepare for. I didn't sign the paper.
I took the succession act and tore it into 100 pieces, throwing them into the oily mud at the lawyer's feet. "I don't want the inheritance," I said, my voice echoing through the silence of the square. "But as the legal heir for the next 60 seconds, I am authorizing Philip to release the master ledger to every news outlet in the country." The lawyer scrambled, shouting about injunctions and lawsuits, but it was too late. Philip had already hit send. The fallout was instantaneous. Within an hour, my father's company's stock price was in free fall. Within 2 hours, the government had frozen every asset associated with the Emeka legacy. Natasha screamed at me, calling me a traitor, a fool, a failure. She scrambled back into the helicopter, leaving me in the dust. I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart that finally felt like it belonged to me. I had chosen to be the failure my father feared, and it was the most successful I had ever felt. Cathartic justice doesn't always look like a courtroom win. Sometimes it looks like a river slowly turning from black back to brown and then to blue. The government seized the $2 billion as part of a massive environmental criminal case, using the funds to build a state-of-the-art water filtration plant in Okoko. I stayed in the village. I didn't return to the penthouse in Lagos or the parties in Lekki. I became a foreman for the cleanup crew. I spend my days ensuring the soil is being decontaminated and the new pipes are built to last a century. One evening, Obi, the old man from the first day, walked up to the new well. He filled a cup, drank it, and then turned to me. He didn't say a word, but he put a weathered hand on my shoulder. It was the first time a man had touched me with respect instead of fear. My father died with a mountain of gold and a heart full of rot. I'll probably die with nothing but a clean conscience and a village that knows my name for the right reasons. And looking at the clear water reflecting the Lagos sky in the distance, I knew I had finally claimed the only inheritance that actually mattered. So, I have to ask you, if you were standing where I stood with that gold pen in your hand and $2 billion on the table, knowing that signing that paper would bury the truth forever but save your family's future, would you have signed it? Or is there a price for your soul that even $2 billion can't reach? Because some people say I'm a hero, others say I'm the biggest fool in the history of Lagos. I want to know which one you think I am. If this story made you question what you do for wealth, hit that like button. It helps us tell more of these hidden narratives. But more importantly, I've pinned a question in the comments about Anthony's choice. Go down there and tell me, is he a hero or a fool? I'll be jumping in to reply to the most honest takes. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a new story dropping next week that makes this one look like a fairy tale. You won't want to miss it.